Hi, friends. Good to see you today. I'm Lee Ritchie, and I'm here to talk to you today as a parent and as a children's minister about how to talk with your child about race. So, this is part 2 in a 3-part series. Last week we talked about, we mostly talked about the why. Why do we talk to our children about race? And so, to sum up, we talk to our children about race because of our love for and relationship with Jesus. Jesus was with people who all looked like God, right? Because we are all made in God's image. He was with those who were hurting and those who were oppressed. He cared about people, and we must care about all God's children as well. And this is our friends of color are in a place of hurting, and we ought to be near and walking alongside. Number 2, we talk with our child about race because we want our children to trust us. We want our children to come to us with difficult questions. We want our children to know that we're not going to skirt around hard conversations. And number 3, because our friends of color are trying to have these hard conversations and having to have these hard conversations with their children. And because we love our friends and our community, we need to be having these conversations with our children too. So today we're going to talk about the how. How do we talk to our children about race? And that's difficult. I feel like last week's conversation was the easy part, and this is where it gets difficult. So I am going to share with you, I'm going to start with the easy part right here. So we're going to talk about books and movies. So I'm going to give you some resources in our comments, and I'm going to share with you. So Rosie Villodas has books and resources for talking with kids about racism. And so I want to share that with you. But the challenge is, and she's got books, and the resources are like podcasts and websites, so it's got some other options as well. But the books are mostly current books, books that have been published very recently. And what I'm discovering, maybe you are too, is that current books are harder to find because everybody is trying to figure out how to talk to their children well or continue the conversation well about race in their home. And so it's hard to get those books from anywhere. So I also want to share with you today some old school books that I have and that you probably can find from the library or from like a used bookstore. So we've got the Who Was or Who Is series. And so that's, who was Rosa Parks, who was Harriet Tubman, who was Frederick Douglass. I have some neighbors and friends who talked with their 1st and 3rd grade boys this year. They read through this book together as a family, and it sparked a lot of deep conversation about racism, about slavery, about the pain of people of color. Okay, Muhammad Ali. What was the Underground Railroad? Who is Aretha Franklin? So those are some really good ones. I also want to encourage you not to discount poetry. Might not be your favorite thing, but I think there are some good options out there. One that I really enjoy is Honey, I Love and Other Love Poems by Eloise Greenfield. It's from Reading Rainbow, y'all. Like, so straight back to my childhood. I think it's a great option. Kids Who Are Changing the World. I think that's an important book because it helps us think about how kids are making a difference, and so how our kids can too. Delivering Justice. This is W.W. Law and the Fight for Civil Rights. This is about Wesley Law and how he fought for civil rights in Savannah, Georgia. We can read great books about people of color doing amazing things. So Jesse Owens. We can read about the Underground Railroad. Follow the Drinking Gourd is also about the Underground Railroad. I think Ezra Jack Keats as an author is always an amazing choice. Okay, and then a book that I read about 6 or 8 months ago that I'm really sad that I didn't read until then. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. I think this is a really good book for your fourth, fifth, and sixth grader, maybe even your third graders if you read it with them. It talks about the challenges of being Black landowners in a time where that was unheard of, or at least very rare. So, yeah, I think it's an excellent book. I highly recommend this one. So another resource that I want to share with you is about movies. And so Women's Day has 14 kid-friendly movies to help build a conversation about race and racism. Now, several of these movies are on Disney Plus, so if that is something that you happen to be connected to, that's an easy win. But all of these books are pretty easily accessible. Movies are pretty easily accessible, and so I invite you to check them out. A book or a movie that I watched recently with my 7-year-old, and part of me cringes every time I think about how we watched this, but the other part of me says we need to be having these conversations, and if he wasn't quite ready, he's on the cusp of being ready. So we watched Ruby Bridges on Disney Plus. It was a hard movie to watch. It was a hard movie for me to watch first, and then it was also difficult for me to watch with him. We stopped the movie about every 5 minutes might be exaggeration, but pretty often to sort of unpack what he was seeing and experiencing, because it was some hard stuff. Now, I don't want to water this down, but if you feel like your child is genuinely not ready for that, or maybe ready for clips of that, and you still want to have your child connect to the Ruby Bridges story, I would say that she penned a book called Through My Eyes. Now, if you don't know about Ruby Bridges, she is the first Black child in the South to go to a white school when segregation ended, and she was 6 years old when this happened. And so this is a book with photographs from the time. Let me see if I can show you a couple. So here, the police officers, Ruby in her classroom with her teacher, just showing a little bit of what it looked like, and she shares her experience. So that is for a child that loves facts and wants to soak in a biography. Then this story, it's the story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles. And this is still the true story of Ruby Bridges, but it is more of a children's, like a young children's book, where you get the story version instead of the fact filled version, if you will. That was hard for my family. It was hard for me. I cried when I watched it by myself, and then I cried when I watched it with my son for a whole different set of reasons. But I think that it's still important to begin those conversations. Very important. Okay, so now we've talked about the easy portion of how we talk with our children about race, because books and movies are easy lead-ins, right? So now let's get to the more challenging parts. So in my family, after we watched the Ruby Bridges story on Disney Plus and we had a chance to talk about it, we actually went and talked to my son's grandparents and said, okay, well, how old were you when integration happened in the school systems? And what was that like? What was your experience with people of different races and going to school? And how did that feel in your community? What did you experience? And it was really interesting to hear our different, my son's different grandparents talk about their experience. I think it can shed some light on where we've been and help us know where we want to go. So I encourage you to have those conversations. And then I also want to encourage you, two things from that, encourage you to have conversation, or to be thinking for yourself about what your experience with race was growing up, because then that's going to help you pay attention to things for your child, but also help you to listen differently as you are out in the world for you and for your child. So no matter what your experience was, and no matter what your parents' experience was, you are still going to need to help your child unpack that. And so there may be some unhealthy things that your parents experienced that you're going to have to help your child understand, and you're going to need to say, that was wrong, whether your parents did it or not, or whether your parents happened to see something happen, whether they reacted well to it or not. You're going to have to help your child name what was appropriate, what was not, how you expect them to love and care for people moving forward. And so I think some troubleshooting, if you will, from those situations would be important. And so you say, well, this is what your grandparent experienced. How would you want to react if that had been your situation? And I know you're pulling it from the wrong time frame, like from a different time frame to current, but you're still trying to help your child think through what it looks like to be right here and now, and what healthy ways your child can act and react and care for and walk with people. Okay. So along those lines, we've got our own bias, right? We've got our explicit bias, those things that we really know and we name and we are conscious about, right? And then those implicit biases. And so I have a couple of resources that I want to share with you. One is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture through the Smithsonian. And it's the page that is talking about race, and it's going to help you look and study your own bias and biases. There are 4 videos on that page. All 4 are great. The very first one is very long, so feel free to kind of skip down if you wanted to grab something a little shorter. But it helps us think about the biases that we know, and those that we probably hold but haven't necessarily named. And so it will help you do that. And then the last resource that I want to make sure to share with you is from healthychildren.org, and they have talking to children about racial bias. And so that helps you kind of look through what that looks like with your children. We all have bias everywhere, and so we have to be paying attention to what those look like and how those inform how we act and react. That might be close to it, folks. So books and movies are really helpful ways to begin those conversations with our children. Talking to our grandparents so that we kind of know where we've been, I think is important. And as parents, we need to think back to the different ways that we have experienced people of color in healthy ways and unhealthy ways, and kind of work through some of that. And then think about our own explicit bias and implicit bias, and be ready to name some of that with our children so that they can see that, yes, everybody's got some things that we've experienced that have impacted the way we receive people. Whew. That's plenty to start for today. I hope that these things continue a great conversation with you and your family. Until next time, happy talking.